welcome to GameSack, and we're talking about random games, and basically what that means is that there's absolutely no theme to this show whatsoever. We're just looking at some random games that we just happen to want to talk about.
Yeah, I went through my game collection and said, whoop, whoop, whoop. I didn't even look at the boxes, I just picked them.
Yeah, I actually picked mine because these are games I want to talk about. But anyway, you've got the first game, so you might as well kick it off.
I will.
Okay, let's check it out.
The Lost Vikings is a fun and very innovative game. It was released for the Super Nintendo and the Genesis. We're mainly looking at the Super Nintendo version in this review. I think you could categorize this game as a platformer/puzzler, and here's why. Basically, you control 3 Vikings, and each one has only one ability that they're capable of doing throughout the game. Eric can run, break down walls, and jump. Balog uses weapons such as a sword and a bow and arrow, but he can't jump. Lastly, you have Olaf, who has a very large shield, and he also can't jump. The goal of each level is to figure out puzzles by using each Viking's ability and reach the exit with all 3 Vikings still alive. It doesn't sound very hard, but at times the puzzles are downright crazy. The levels are all short to average length, and that's good because it'll take some time figuring out each area. You'll be switching back and forth between the Vikings constantly, so don't expect to just blow through a level quickly. I really enjoy how this game looks, and it has that Western developer style to the graphics and backgrounds. You know, it wasn't often that you gotta like a Western developed game back when this came out. I'm just kidding, everybody, so stop writing those hateful comments. I really like the look of the game over screen with a Viking funeral boat sailing away on fire in the soft moonlight. It's a good thing too, as you'll be seeing the screen a lot. Actually, you can just restart a level by hitting start if one of your Vikings dies, but that just isn't as exciting. The music is really nice and has some really good tracks. Although the SNES and Genesis versions have the same songs, they're arranged with different sounds. The Super Nintendo version was released first. A year later came the Genesis version, and it contains more stages than the SNES version, which I find completely offensive. The Genesis doesn't deserve this extra love. I mean, what's up with that? If you're looking for a different kind of game to play, give this one a shot. It's heaps of fun and feels really fresh compared to everything else.
Crusader of Centi is a Zelda clone by Atlas for the Genesis. Well, clone may be putting it a bit too harshly, I think. This game does have a lot of originality. This was called Ragna Centi in Japan and Soleil in Europe, and I'm just gonna assume I just totally destroyed those pronunciations and move on. Anyway, you just turned 14 years old, and that means you inherit your dead father's sword and get to go out and kill things. Ah, the joys of being 14. So you go inform the king that you're 14, and he lets you train on the training grounds. But there are evil forces at work, and yes, you'll end up stopping them completely by the time you finish the game. As in any action RPG of this type, you acquire new skills as you progress, but unique to this game are the animal helpers. You can assign 2 different animal abilities at a time, and they each have their own special power, like this one, which will let you run faster. Using certain animals together can also have a combining effect as well, but not all animals will combine with every other animal. There is one animal that you encounter who definitely won't help you. He just sits there and takes it easy like the lazy ass he is. Oh well, it's still cool that he's here, I guess. You can hire some animals which offer a one-time use, like this one, which will restore your life when it's gone. He works automatically and you don't even need to equip him, but once he's used, you gotta go all the way back to where you found him and hire him again. You also learn the ability to run, throw your sword, jump, and all sorts of stuff to help you out. So I think the game is definitely unique enough to stand out from other Zelda clones. Everything controls well, and it's usually your fault when bad things happen. But one thing I really hate is when you get hit, you bounce back and make this really stupid noise. Ugh, it's just incredibly annoying, but honestly, that's as bad as this game gets, and that's a good thing, actually. If you're having a hard time with the game, you can send away for the strategy guide, which will definitely help you out if that's your sort of thing. The graphics are all really well done, and I like the style. The music's not too shabby either. Unfortunately, this game has really shot up in price lately. A cartridge-only copy of the game goes for well over $100, so I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to emulate it or run it on a flash card. But it really is a great game that everyone should at least try.
Poppin' Twin B is an overhead shooter by Konami released in 1993 for the Super Famicom. This was one of the games I always wanted to talk about in our Left in Japan series, but then I realized it was released in Europe, so that put an end to that. Now that we're doing a completely random game episode, I finally get my chance. This has got to be one of the most colorful games I've ever played, as it's just bursting with bright, pretty, girly colors. Oh, and the graphics aren't bad either. Lots of nice detail in the enemy sprites and backgrounds. But just because it's pretty doesn't mean it's easy. The power-up system in this game is kind of unique, and it can be a pain in the ass sometimes getting the power-ups that you want. You see, when you shoot these clouds, a bell pops out of them. Every time you shoot the bell, it changes color. The color of the bell that you collect determines which power-up you get. So not only do you have to memorize what color corresponds to what power-up, you also have to juggle these bells while killing enemies, and this adds a huge layer of difficulty. There's been many times that I've wanted to collect a pink bell for a shield and end up shooting it on accident as I'm trying to kill an enemy hovering nearby. Oh well, each level is loaded with bells, so you'll have many chances to get as many power-ups as you desire. At first I really hated this system, but over the years I've actually learned to enjoy it. Besides having a normal shot, you also can drop bombs on enemies that are on the ground. You can also punch enemies with your ship if you get close enough. And if you get into a tight spot, you have a super bomb, which is really just about 20 of your ships bouncing off the walls and hitting everything in sight. Careful though, because this attack is limited to a certain number. Another feature that I kind of like is that you have a life bar instead of having a stock of ships. The only problem is that once your life bar runs out and you continue, you have to start the level over. You know, this kind of sucks because the levels are fairly long. All in all, this is a great game with some really good music. Check it out because you just might like it.
Everyone remembers RC Pro-Am on the NES, right? Of course they do! It was programmed by Rare and you raced remote-controlled cars around an isometric track. It was pretty popular back when it came out, believe it or not. As you race around, you pick up items which can upgrade your car or allow you to attack your rivals, and you're probably gonna need them. There's also water puddles, oil slicks, rain clouds, and things like that which can mess you up and make you lose your place. It's all pretty easy to control and it's definitely fun to play, but it's game over if you finish in last place. Of course, Sega had to have their own version, which is RC Grand Prix for the Master System. The premise is pretty much the same. Race cars around the track and try to finish in first place if you can. Instead of picking items up around the track, you get money when you win, but unfortunately not very much. Once you do have enough money, you go to the store to buy better parts from this creepy-ass guy. This is great and all, but I really wish it'd show me how much money I have instead of only showing me the prices. The racing action itself is alright. I kind of like the graphics, but the tracks are not as well designed as RC Pro-Am. It's pretty hard to keep from bumping into walls until you memorize the track layout. There's also a ridiculously short timer. This game was programmed by Absolute Entertainment and it was published by Seismic. You know, the same publishers behind Musha. I think that's pretty cool that they released a Master System game. Overall, this one just isn't as good as RC Pro-Am. You tried RC Grand Prix. You tried. No, you could have tried harder. And since we're here, we might as well mention RC Pro-Am 2 for the NES. This one adds a few new things like hills and 4-player capability. There's still stuff scattered around the tracks, but this time you collect money as well. Between races, you use it to buy stuff in the store. However, I could never really fully figure out exactly how the store worked and how to buy stuff. It's a really clumsy system. I know I bought stuff, but I just don't know exactly how I did it. Even RC Grand Prix is better in this area. But overall, the game is pretty fun. But watch out for these airplanes that bomb you, because I wasn't in 4th enough place already, thanks. It's a good game, but I think I had a bit more fun with the first one.
Believe it or not, Ninja Gaiden Shadow for the Game Boy was not developed wholly by Tecmo. This game was originally going to be a Game Boy version of Shadow of the Ninja, which is an NES game by Natsume. Somewhere along the development lines, probably towards the end, Tecmo got involved and changed it to a Ninja Gaiden title. Not a lot was added from Ninja Gaiden except for some character graphics and the fire wheel magic. Everything else feels very much like Shadow of the Ninja. Anyways, it doesn't really matter that much as it's still quite a fun Game Boy title. It's a bit on the easy side, but there's still enough platforming and fighting here to keep the game moving and fun to play. Controlling Ryu is easy and using his grapple hook thing is a cinch. Most of the bosses are super easy as they have very simple patterns that you can learn fairly quickly. Graphically, the game is pretty good. I like the looks of all the enemies and backgrounds. And they use the Game Boy's rich color palette to the fullest. If I'm not mistaken, I think they used all 4 of the shades of gray. Besides that, one of the later levels even has a couple layers of scrolling. The music is really good. I've said it before and I'll say it again, but I really like the Game Boy sound chip. I'm not sure why I chose this game. I wanted to include a Game Boy game as I still do play a lot of games on the system. It was truly just a random pick, but a good one I think. If you like the Game Boy as much as I do, you really can't go wrong with this one.
Whoa, Dave, this is just crazy. It's totally random. I just can't get over how random this is.
This is insane. It's like we're in a Super Mario world. It's just nuts.
Yeah, guess what? Guess what my next game is?
Platoon on the NES.
Wrong. It's this. Nightmare Busters is a brand new release for the Super Nintendo. This is a run and gun game that was originally programmed back in the late 90s, but it was never released. It was canceled. But now Super Fighter Team has finished it up in partnership with the original programmers, and they decided, well, hey, might as well release it to the world. Anyway, you play as this ugly little leprechaun thing, and your main attack is throwing cards. I guess the enemies just explode and die due to massive paper cuts? I don't know. You can get different weapon power-ups though. Right off the bat, you're going to notice that this game is hard. You really need to take your time with this one and not rush forward too quickly or you're going to regret it. Some people say they can beat it after just a few tries, but I am definitely not one of those people. But the good news is that the graphics are really good. In fact, they're quite awesome. Great use of color and especially shading. The only thing I really don't like about the graphics is the way your character looks. He's just so ugly and unappealing. I don't want to play as this thing. He's also pretty fat, which makes it tough to avoid all the things that'll hurt you if you touch him. Anyway, there's tons of action on screen and lots of stuff drops for you to collect if you want to increase your score. Oh, and did I mention that this game is 2 players simultaneous? That's right, bring a friend along to blast with you. This really doesn't seem to make the game any easier though. In fact, if your friend sucks more than you do, it can make it a bit harder. But 2-player mode is a great option to have, and the game doesn't seem to slow down much, at least in the first half of the game, which is all I'm able to reach so far. I'll keep trying. The music isn't bad. A bit muffled maybe, but certainly nothing offensive. The sound effects are pretty good overall and have some nice stereo separation. As far as I know, you can only get this from nightmarebusters.com, so check it out if you're up for some crazy hard but doable, supposedly, run and gun action.
When I first got Willow on the NES, I was a bit disappointed. At the time, I really wanted an action platformer like the arcades, but instead I got this action RPG. Well, I played the game anyway, and after a little bit of time I really started to have a lot of fun. Capcom did a really good job with this one, and it sucked me in and I was in for the long haul. This is fairly typical for an action RPG. You run around and kill on-screen enemies, and by doing so you gain experience to level up and gain more hit points and magic points. Throughout the game you'll get more powerful weapons and different types of accessories and magic. You'll talk to people all over to get hints and items to help further the story. It's all nothing new, but I feel that Willow stands out a little in its presentation. Like here, when battling enemies, I really like how the grass and trees blow in the wind as you're fighting. The music is really good and it's unmistakably Capcom. The only problem is that there aren't a lot of tracks. Having different music to go with different parts of Willow's world would have been nice. Instead, we really just have the same overworld, dungeon, and battle music throughout the game. The world that Willow must journey through is pretty big. There's lots of areas to explore, and each one with dead ends and paths that seem to crisscross a lot. Back in the early 90s when I played this game, it was necessary to draw a map to keep track of where you've been. Nowadays, that's not a problem because there's maps everywhere to look at online. I don't remember a lot of the movies, so I'm not sure how closely this game follows the story, but I do know it has a lot of the main characters here. If you haven't played Willow, you should give it a try as it's a solid game, and you know what, it can be had for very cheap.
Blue's Journey was one of the earliest games released on the Neo Geo. You play as Blue, who's trying to save the planet Rag-Eye from overpollution. And as everyone knows, the best way to fix that problem is to run and jump around in a side-scrolling platformer. This is actually quite unlike any other game for the system. The gameplay feels more like something you'd find on the Genesis or the Super Nintendo, but with Neo Geo power backing it up. Basically, you have a big leaf, which is your primary attack. When you swing your leaf, you stun enemies, and then you can pick them up and toss them into other enemies. You also encounter pink flower pods, which give you lots of different weapons like bombs or even this cool boomerang thing. Oh, and there's shops that you can enter to buy items which can restore your life or other typical things, but you can't buy weapons. These little pink flowers that you pick up are actually the currency in the game. As you're running around trying to save Planet Rag-Eye, you can press the C button to shrink your character down using the Neo Geo's super powerful scaling ability. You can get into small crevices when you're in this mode. You can also move a bit faster and jump a bit higher when you're small, so it can help make the platforming a little bit more easy, but be careful because you cannot attack when you're like this. Eventually you'll encounter a boss, and after you defeat it, you'll be given a choice which way you want to go. There's lots of different stages in here, and they use some really bright colors that you don't typically see on the Neo Geo. The graphics are actually really good for such an early game. Their attempt at English is really funny though. Lottery drewing? Whoever receives any damage is the loster? This game is full of assaults on the English language like this, and honestly, it just really adds to the charm. The music is cute and upbeat, and overall the sound quality is pretty good. This is a really fun game that used to be really cheap, but unfortunately now it's starting to go up in price. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, and hey, maybe you might too.
The Legend of Hero Tonma on the TurboGrafx-16 is a port of an Irem arcade game. Knowing that it was an arcade game should immediately clue you in onto the game's difficulty. Firstly, let's take a look at the game's aesthetics. As you can see, the game is nice and colorful. Your character, enemy sprites, and backgrounds are all detailed and nice to look at. The music is okay at best, but there's really nothing great in terms of melody or composition. Now let's take a look at the controls. Tonma is really easy to control. He can jump super high, which I like, and it makes platforming really easy. He has a projectile weapon which can be leveled up several times, and that makes killing enemies a breeze. He can also get a barrier or a secondary weapon like a homing fireball or a bomb that he throws like a basketball, which has a small blast radius for some nice damage. Tonma can't shoot vertically, which is a shame as there's a lot of times I'd like to shoot just straight up. Oh well, I guess that's why they let him jump 20 feet in the air. And finally, let's get to the difficulty level. The game is very much like an arcade game because Tonma dies after getting hit one time. It's a bit annoying sometimes, but it just makes you want to try harder because the levels don't come off as being hard. Most of the levels are fairly short, and then you have a boss fight. I think the difficulty comes from certain areas of levels where lots of enemies are located, but once you understand the pattern that you must use to get ahead, it becomes much easier. Oh, and the game has infinite continue, so that also helps make it easier to keep trying over and over again until you get it. I like this game, and I'm glad to have it in my collection. Like most late release games on the TurboGrafx-16, this one goes for a pretty hefty price these days, and even the Japanese version is close to $100 now. So feel free to pick it up. You must regret it later.
Kadash for the TurboGrafx-16 is only the second game ever published by Working Designs. It's a port of the Taito arcade game of the same name, and one of only 2 games released by Working Designs that weren't on disc. You choose from 4 different characters. I usually choose the generic fighter because I myself am quite generic. This game also supports 2-player simultaneous gameplay. Basically, you're called upon by the king to save the princess. Pretty standard stuff. But it plays like a side-scrolling action RPG if you can believe that. It's kinda sorta similar to how Castlevania 2 works, but a little bit more simplified. You gain levels via experience points, and unfortunately you're gonna have to do some grinding. But fortunately, the instant enemy regeneration makes this pretty much a snap. You just need the patience, and it takes a while sometimes. Sadly though, there's no way to see exactly how much experience you need to reach the next level or how much money you're currently carrying unless you're in a shop. And speaking of money, you collect it from your defeated foes to use in the shops to buy better weapons, armor, and other items. To keep things interesting, there's plenty of bosses around that are just waiting for you to come and say hi. Now this is kind of a tough game, and like I said, you really do have to grind, but still, I find it really addictive. And no, there's none of the typical humor that you'd expect from Working Designs. I guess they just decided to take the safe route with their first few releases. The graphics are extremely colorful and pleasant to look at. The music sounds fairly primitive, but it can still be catchy. The Genesis version was published in the US by Taito themselves. This one is much closer to the arcade version than the Turbo, but I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not. The graphics are a lot darker and they chose some really poor colors. The music doesn't sound as primitive, but it somehow manages to be less enjoyable. As for the gameplay in this version, there are pros and there are cons. The regular enemies are more reasonable here, and it seems like it takes less time to gain a level. There's also parallax scrolling now, and that helps the otherwise poor graphics somewhat. You can also pause the game to check out all of your stats to see how you're doing. But the boss fights suck ass. Your reach is pathetic, and it's tough to get a hit in edgewise sometimes. And for some reason, you can only choose from 2 different characters. The other 2 were just completely deleted from the game. Anyway, here's both versions side by side. Both were recorded from direct RGB from a real console, so any judgment you lay down here is completely fair. Which one do you like better? As for me, I prefer the TurboGrafx 16 version in almost every respect except not being able to see your stats. I'm perfectly happy with the bright cartoony graphics even if they aren't super faithful to the arcade. And naturally, of course, the TurboGrafx 16 is the more expensive one. Still, it's a pretty fun game either way.
Alright everybody, there you have it. 10 completely random games that have nothing to do with each other.
Except the fact that we wanted to talk about them, and
Yes.
this was kind of the only way we could on quite a few of them.
Yeah, because some of them just don't fit really well into certain categories maybe.
Exactly. And what did you guys think of this episode?
Yeah.
Would you like to see more random game episodes like this? Personally,
Please say yes.
Yeah, please, because I really like doing this. And
Yeah,
just
it was
picking
fun.
games I wanted to talk about. So, I want to talk about this one. Oh, this one is a racing game. I want to talk about this one, but it has nothing to do with this giant Neo Geo game.
Yeah.
So I think it was really cool.
Yeah, I agree totally. That was really fun.
Hopefully you guys think the same. And in the meantime, thank you for watching GameSet.
Tell your mom. Hey, Joe. Sorry I'm late and all. You know, I got caught in traffic and I just couldn't make it on time.
You are really late, Dave.
Well, yeah, I know that, but I'm here now. So do you want to hop in the studio and just get this thing going?
Well, actually, Dave, I've already recorded the episode.
Well, how? I wasn't even here.
Well, I had Jen fill in for you. Hello and welcome to GameSack. We're talking about random games this time. What?
Makeup and shoes.
No, video games. Come on.
No, makeup and shoes.
Damn you, Dave!